Hi, you can clearly see the difference between the journalist and the entrepreneur and the VC. VC comes up on stage just prepared during the other talks, has no slides, and thinks probably he knows it all. You'll find that out, and I'll find that out in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So we're a VC based in Vienna. Who has ever heard of Vienna? Okay, that's good. Who knows a VC out of Vienna? That's what I thought. It's probably the most random place to start a fund because there's no tech scene, or there was no tech scene a couple of years ago. It was basically just a couple of entrepreneurs that started that. We raised 10 million first, and we're now on our second fund, which is a 100 million fund. So we're probably the biggest VC in Austria, I'd say, because there's 3 or so, and all of the others are smaller than us. And that also means we cannot invest our money in Austria because there's not enough companies to invest 100 million in, so we invest all over Europe, and especially in CEE. And for those that don't know what CEE might be, this acronym, I found out it's also plug, like a power plug, that's called CEE, but I'm meaning this area that spans basically from Estonia down to Albania, Central and Eastern Europe, and I'd like to think that Austria is sort of the core of it, or is sort of on the brink of it, which is this country, just to be sure here. So we invest a lot there, and also in Germany, Switzerland. Funnily enough, never in France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Don't ask me why. I'd love to do so, but it just never happened. We've seen companies from those countries, but we never invested. And I'd like to sort of shed some light on how it is to run a startup, build and run a startup there, and what might be interesting there. So a couple of questions first. So who of you is originally from London? The UK? Originally from the UK? Okay, so you're probably from these countries, or some of these countries, right? Which also shows you that a lot of these people, they would go somewhere else with their startups. They'll found their companies somewhere else. They'll work somewhere else. But a lot of them, they stay there and they actually grow their companies there. And in many cases, they also go back. Who has ever heard of a company called Avast? ESET? Telerik? No one, right? All of these companies, they have 1,000 or 2,000 employees. They're originally founded in one of those countries, and they exited for 300 million or more. In fact, some of those companies even exited for $1 billion or more. And you've probably never heard of them. Maybe you have an antivirus scanner on your computer. Chances are really high that those guys did it, and they were founded in Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. And all of those guys, and we very often co-invest with them because they also funded VC funds, they're really good guys, they're really good entrepreneurs. And how did they do it in those countries? How did a company like Runtastic, that you might know or might heard of, sell to Adidas for 200 million and be founded in a town called Linz, where I'm sure nobody has ever heard about that? Yeah, it's a town in Austria, a small town in Austria. Their offices are actually atop a shopping center, right? The shopping mall. That's where they built it. They now have close to 350 employees, and they build running apps. So how is that possible? And I think looking at that, I'd start with a metaphor, very VC-ish. So if you think, what does it need to grow? It actually needs a soil that's laws, tax laws, education. That's sort of the environment that you have your plant in. Then you plant the seed, which is your startup. You want it to grow, so it needs some rain, it needs some sunlight. In my view, this is clients and users, access to those, and access to capital. And you need an ecosystem around you. And if I look at the soil, well, most of these countries, my view is they'll either be complacent or communist. Now, that's a harsh verdict, I know, but if you look at those countries and look at the people there, very often, like in Austria, it's such a beautiful country, and there's such a good infrastructure. We have a tax quote that is close to 50%, why would you found a company, right? There's so many good companies to work for. Life is so nice. It's so nice. Why found a company? And if you go to these countries, they've just been through, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years of communism, which basically tells them that going out, being bold, believing in your idea, running around telling everyone that you will one day rule the world is totally arcane to them. It's totally against the sense of community and a bit of the socialist tendencies that I've seen in Fabrice's talk, right? So you care about the community and you never stick out. So how are you supposed to do that and go onto a stage at TC Disrupt and pitch the hell out of yourself to a point where it's embarrassing to yourself? But it needs to be embarrassing, right? In order to work. So that's kind of the problem that those countries have and that they're trying to get out of in very different ways. And it started everywhere a couple of years ago. Some of them are further. Some of them are lagging behind. But if you, for example, look at Bulgaria, I've just been in Sofia last week, 3 days. Great community. Actually, French guy went there, built one of the most beautiful co-working spaces I've ever seen. Tech scene is thriving. They have entrepreneurs that fund them because they know what it takes. And they're actually really good coders, right? So they're really brilliant tech people. And that's what you'll find in most of those countries. You'll find very well educated, very knowledgeable product and tech guys. But if you're looking for a sales or business guy in those countries, that's a different story. Typical US startup, especially SaaS, 10 developers, 10 sales guys, right? They'll call you every second day to make that close. And they'll, they have all their sales tactics and everything ready. Typical startup in Bulgaria, 10 developers, no sales guy. And then you talk to the founder and say, hey guy, you gotta sell your product, right? Otherwise it's not gonna work. And he's like, oh, really? How do I do that? Do you know of a guy that I could hire? So, well, look around. Is there anyone? Like, do you see other salespeople somewhere? No. So they need to figure it out themselves, which is really hard, especially if you're either communist or complacent. Salespeople, really hard to find and really hard to grow. So that's the soil. Good education. The laws are quite okay unless you're in Hungary. Every legal act in Hungary, like if you set up a company, every copy needs to be signed by yourself. So people come up with stamps, like they have stamps that they use for the signature. Everyone has a signature stamp because paperwork is such a pain in the ass that it takes them hours to actually sign documents. So laws roughly the same, people, really good material with some deficiencies on one or the other side. Let's talk about sunlight and water. Clients. This is our single biggest problem in these regions, and you have a bit of an advantage. There's not enough clients in your language or your region or your jurisdiction to actually sell your product to. If you're trying to build a B2C company in Bulgaria, you're fucked. I mean, come on. Best you get like some decent distribution in Bulgaria, but that's not going to rule the world. That's not going to take you anywhere. And that's our biggest problems. We get the local stars from, I don't know, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia. They have very good coverage of their country in Slovene language with the Slovene sales force, with a product that is built for the Slovenian market. So the really good ones, they go to London, San Francisco, Berlin anyways, and they build their product for a global audience. But that's a tiny fraction, right? So this is our biggest problem. And it's the same in Austria. I mean, we've got the German-speaking market, but Austrians and Germans, kind of a different story, difficult story. So that's our problem, and that will not change, so we need to work with that. That's just, that's a fact, and that's why I think the European Union is one of the most important projects that we have, because this is our biggest disadvantage against the US. If you launch a SaaS company in the US, 200 million clients like that, try to find 200 million people that you can sell to in Europe, and you're going to spend a lifetime doing it. Investments, well, totally catching up. If you just add up the number or the amount of VC money that has been raised in Germany alone in the past 18 months, you end up at 3 to 4 billion probably. Rocket Internet raised $1 billion. There's a couple of 400 to 500 million funds. If you look into all those countries, they get heavily subsidized by the European Union through European Investment Fund, who does fund-of-fund investments. My guess is, I don't have the number, but my guess is that they poured at least 2 to 3 billion into that in those countries in the last years, with very different effects. Bulgaria, for example, works. Romania works. Slovakia works. And then you got Hungary. They plan to fund 1,000 startups in the next 3 years based on a government scheme. But the problem is they're taking up to 70% of every company. So you end up with a huge number of companies that are basically unfundable because the government owns 70% of them, which is a weird thing to do, but stuff happens, right? If there's too much money involved, stuff happens. But there's really good investors. France, Kima Ventures, we very often co-invest. Seedcamp has been looking to a lot of European companies. If you go to Germany, there's really good investors. Point 9 is for Schuster marketplace, is really top of the pops actually. There's a lot of good funds who would do investments there, and also young upstart funds in those countries that do really a brilliant job. They have to find their way, they have to learn, they need a few cycles, right, to get it right, but they'll get there. So I think that's a thing. And then the last part is actually the ecosystem. Because the one revelation I had when we were sending companies to Y Combinator was not that the mentors were better, that the environment was in any way better, they could grow their startup better, but they all grew faster. And why was that? Because there were 100 other founders sitting next to them at dinners, in the coffee shop, showing on demo day, 100 other people that were growing faster as them, that would develop faster as them. And if you look at biology, it's a very natural thing, right? If there's a tree and he's alone, there's no ambition to grow, right? Because you have all the resources you need. It's your place, your sun, your water, your soil. But if resources are scarce and there's other trees next to you and you need to actually get your ass up to get the sunlight, you're growing faster. And that's the one thing that we don't have in those countries. That is very rare to get. Because if you go to, again, Sofia, there's one co-working space, right? So there's 50 other people. And most of them are not as ambitious as you are. So to actually plug into those resources and get people next to you, surround yourself with people that will actually fuel that ambition into you, that is the main challenge that this region has. And if there's something that I think London can provide, then it's exactly that. So my conclusion would be there's a very natural fit with a region that has it all but lacks some to team up and do great stuff.